It is a truth universally accepted in North Hampshire that the Reverend Canon Melbury of St. Ethelburga's, Little Tolling, cannot be relied upon to tell time when left to his own devices, a fact which may seem insignificant to those unacquainted with the ecclesiastical workings of a rural parish, but which turned out to be of momentous consequence when, on a fog-bound Thursday morning in March, the funeral of the Honourable George Lutterthwaite proceeded precisely on schedule, without the body, Lord Peter Death Breton Wimsey, who had happened upon Little Tolling in pursuit of a particularly elusive folio edition of the Anatomy of Melancholy at a nearby antiquarian's, was not, by any stretch of the imagination, supposed to attend the service. But a clerical miscommunication, and a particularly damp inn parlour, had led him to accept an invitation to the rectory for sherry and sandwiches, and thence to the church itself, where he found himself seated, somewhat irreverently, in the E.I. Lutterthwaite family pew, which bore the faded escutcheon of a rampant lion suffering from what looked suspiciously like rickets. The Lutterthwaite funeral, as advertised on the parish notice board and whispered about with the clammy relish peculiar to English villages, had been organised with much haste but extraordinary decorum. George Lutterthwaite, eldest son of the late Viscount Framstone, and a man distinguished chiefly by his uninterrupted absence from society for the better part of 2 decades, had been reported drowned following a solitary boating excursion off the coast of Cornwall. The coroner had returned an open verdict. The family, ever mindful of appearances, had chosen to proceed with the service in hope, not certainty, as Lady Ottoline Lutterthwaite had put it, to those of her circle who still spoke to her after the 1913 incident with the absinthe and the French violinist. What was not expected, what was not done, was for the hearse to arrive solemnly, the pallbearers to arrange themselves with fitting melancholy, and the officiant to pronounce the familiar words, only for the verger, an angular man named Fenworthy, with the face of a discontented haddock, to lean in and whisper something that caused the canon's eyebrows to disappear entirely into his clerical fringe. "I say," murmured Wimsey as the congregation shifted like uneasy sheep, "have we reached that remarkable age in the church when spiritual transubstantiation can replace corporeal presence in the matter of funerary rites?" "You what, sir?" hissed a woman beside him, who smelled sharply of beeswax and onions, and had clearly not meant to be addressed. Wimsey made a slight apologetic bow. "Forgive me. I merely remark upon the increasingly minimalist trends in Anglican ritual. No body, no bother, eh? The funeral was postponed with exquisite English discretion. No one made a scene. There were no tears. Only a thin ripple of murmurs, a cough from the back pew, and the slow, painful unwinding of protocol as the mourners filed out into the graveyard's stony hush. Lady Ottoline, looking like an over-embroidered ghost in dove-grey crepe, stood with her gloved hands clasped. Beside her was Dr. Algernon Venn, the Lutterthwaite family physician, whose nose gave the impression of having been in a long, one-sided argument with the wind. Also present, Miss Cordelia Lutterthwaite, niece and reluctant heiress, whose wide eyes suggested she had just remembered she left something terribly incriminating in the drawing-room. Mr. Nathaniel Thrubb, the family solicitor, bulging with importance and pinstripes, and the rector, whose incoherent apologies stumbled out between sips of the port that had been brought out early, presumably to forestall collapse. "I say, Venn," Wimsey said genially, ambling toward the cluster with the air of a man inquiring about the weather. "One couldn't help noticing a certain, lacuna in the liturgical arrangements. Tell me, were the remains misrouted, or has the late George perhaps experienced a change of heart?" Lady Ottoline let out a noise suspiciously close to a snort, which she quickly transformed into a cough. "Lord Peter, your levity is always bracing," she said, "though now may not be the moment." "My dear lady," Wimsey said gravely, "I have never been more serious in my life. There's nothing like the absence of a corpse to stiffen one's resolve. Dr. Venn glanced uneasily at the solicitor, who frowned at his pocket watch, as if suspecting it of complicity. Cordelia fluttered. "He was meant to be here," she said, her voice just above a whisper. "I mean, well, his things washed up, his hat, the boat. The newspaper said as much. We all assumed—" "Quite," said Whimsy. "A hat is frequently the first to go, even in milder forms of dissolution. But a whole man, less obliging." Thrubb cleared his throat. "This is not the place for speculation. The arrangements were made in good faith, based on a letter from the Cornish police and a signed affidavit from the Coast Guard. There is every reason to believe Mr. Lutterthwaite drowned. The body may yet be recovered." Whimsy nodded, thoughtfully. "Yes, though bodies are dreadfully prone to inconvenient timing. Still, one must ask, why proceed with the funeral at all, given the uncertainty?" "Because," Lady Otterline said, steel surfacing through her silks, "George would have wanted it, and frankly, we could not afford to postpone the ceremony again, not with the bishop's calendar and the inheritance arrangements being what they are." Whimsy lifted an eyebrow. "The will?" he asked delicately. "Sealed," said Thrubb. "Pending official declaration of death." "Which can't happen," murmured Whimsy, "until a certain stubborn corpse consents to make its presence known." How awkward. From somewhere beyond the hedgerow came the faint sound of bells, not church bells, but the tinny, inexplicable jangle of something mechanical and distant. It was a lonely sort of sound, made all the lonelier by the fact that no one else appeared to hear it. Whimsy straightened, dusting a fleck of ash from his cufflink. "Well," he said, "if there's one thing more suspicious than a man who turns up dead, it's a man who doesn't turn up at all, especially to his own funeral. You must permit me a few questions purely in the spirit of curiosity. Idle curiosity, of course, the most dangerous kind." And with that, the first ripples of unease began to stir the surface of Little Tolling's gentle, stagnant calm. Whimsy did not press his inquiries at once. He had long discovered the British country's psyche required a certain gestational period before any meaningful information could be extracted. One had to let the silence curdle a bit first. Accordingly, he remained for the post-funeral tea at the rectory, though there was neither corpse nor grave to toast, and conversation floundered under the weight of enforced decorum and badly chilled sponge cake. He observed from a corner, sipping his weak Darjeeling with an air of idle indulgence, as the mourners grouped themselves in familiar formations, Lady Otterline, impassively regal beside a stammering Thrubb. Cordelia seated near the fire, her long fingers nervously destroying the corner of a napkin. Venn pacing by the windows with the look of a man attempting to conjure an alibi from thin air. The rector, meanwhile, had retired altogether, presumably to weep into his cassock over ecclesiastical embarrassment. Whimsy allowed himself a few pleasantries with Miss Cordelia before making his excuses and departing the rectory. He did not go far. A short stroll brought him down a mossy path and into the village proper, where the faint clang of a blacksmith's hammer served as the only sign of industry. He paused outside the post office, cast a speculative eye on the tea shop, shuttered on account of funeral hours, and made his way toward the churchyard once more, where he found the verger, Fenworthy, kneeling beside the open but conspicuously unoccupied grave. "Ah," said Whimsy, removing his hat. "Mourning in absentia, are we?" Fenworthy did not look up. "Just checking the depth, my lord. Protocol." "Very correct of you. I say, has this ever happened before? Graves dug and never used?" Fenworthy sat back on his heels, brushing soil from his hands. "Once, for old Miss Weevil. Died in '02, but they misplaced her body on the way back from London. Found her weeks later in a furniture depot in Clapham." "Gothic," murmured Whimsy approvingly. "Tell me, was it you who received the coffin this morning?" The verger frowned. "Coffin never came." "So I gathered. But were you told to expect it?" Fenworthy scratched his ear. "Courier was to arrive from Crowthorpe Station. Lutterthwaite's lawyer arranged it, or so I was told. Ah, yes, Mr. Thrubb. Do you know if he confirmed the delivery? Fenworthy shrugged. He left a note with Canon Melbury last week, said arrangements were final, nothing more. Wimsey thanked him and wandered off, hands clasped behind his back, whistling a few bars of the Yeoman of the Guard. He made a brief stop at the village inn, where a suspiciously flustered barmaid denied having seen any coffin-bearing couriers, and a stable-boy offered a vague recollection of a man with a van heading toward the moor 2 days past. That afternoon, he telephoned Bunter from the local exchange. The conversation was short and clipped. Bunter was to telephone the Cornwall Constabulary and obtain every detail pertaining to George Lutterthwaite's supposed death, witnesses, objects recovered, the exact circumstances of the boat's discovery. No speculation, only facts. Having dispatched his instructions, Wimsey returned to the rectory at Lady Otterline's invitation for what she termed a practical discussion. This turned out to involve a decanter of sherry, an atlas of the south coast, and a brittle truce between herself and Mr. Thrubb, who had evidently thawed under pressure. "We've had no proper confirmation, you understand," Lady Otterline said, pouring for him. "Just the things, the hat, the walking stick, the letter. They assured us the tides were perilous, and recovery unlikely." Wimsey inclined his head. "Tides are famously inconsiderate. And yet," she continued, "there was something about it all. George never wrote to me, not in 20 years. But suddenly, this letter, saying he wished to set matters—" "Right. What on earth was that to mean? Could you describe the letter?" "Brief. Written in George's hand. Postmarked from Truro. He said he'd been thinking a great deal about the old place and wanted to return. Said he'd take a boat out and give himself time to reflect." "Poetic," Wimsey murmured. "And very tidy. And what of the inheritance?" At this, Thrubb shifted uncomfortably. "There's a clause. The estate reverts to Cordelia if George is declared legally deceased. The date of death would fix retroactively to the incident, presumed to be last Wednesday." How charmingly precise. And George, one presumes, had no intention of returning to claim the estate? "No," Lady Otterline said flatly. "George had no interest in the house. He despised the place, called it a mausoleum full of rotting armchairs. And yet he wrote of returning. That suggests a change of heart, or an impostor." Lady Otterline's eyes narrowed. "You don't believe it was George?" "I believe," said Wimsey with an air of mild boredom, "that people generally prefer to drown by accident than arrangement. Tell me, who would benefit most if George were thought dead but no body could be found?" Thrubb's lips pursed. "If the body never appears and no proof is available, then the estate remains in limbo. No legal death certificate, no transfer. Cordelia inherits nothing." "Ah." Wimsey rose, inspecting a fly on the decanter. "Then someone's being very clever, or very foolish. Either they've engineered a death with no follow-through, or George Lutterthwaite is rather more alive than expected. I intend to find out which." The next morning, Wimsey made his way to Crowthorpe Station, where he confirmed that no delivery matching a coffin had been logged in the past week. The porters were emphatic. Deliveries for the tolling area were typically registered and signed off. Nothing had come through under the Lutterthwaite name, nor had any van departed for the village that day. On his return, he called again on Miss Cordelia Lutterthwaite, whom he found in the morning room struggling to open a tin of anchovies. "With far more intensity than the task deserved, may I?" he asked, and opened it with an elegant flick of the wrist. She laughed, a short, grateful sound. "I'm hopeless at anything practical. And yet I gather you've been handling most of the estate's affairs since your uncle's disappearance?" "Yes. Well, someone had to." Aunt Otterline simply freezes. "Quite. Tell me, Miss Cordelia, Had you corresponded with George in the years preceding his disappearance? She looked down. Once, about 4 months ago. I'd written asking if he'd let the staff go. There was no money, left for wages. I told him if he didn't care for the house, he should say so. He never replied. Until the letter? Yes, but I didn't see it. It came to Aunt Ottoline. She told me about it later. Whimsy made a thoughtful noise. Do you recall precisely when the estate's debts became unmanageable? She hesitated. Last summer. There were some investments, not my doing, but the solicitor warned us that if something didn't change, we'd have to begin selling land. Aunt Ottoline refused. I see. So George's death, if that's what it is, solves very little. Unless, of course, someone knew how to make it solve something. Her eyes met his. Do you think someone killed him? I think, said Whimsy, rising with the air of a man who had arrived at a personal resolution, that someone has gone to a great deal of trouble to convince us George Lutterthwaite is dead. But whether he is, or merely wants to be believed, so remains to be seen. For the moment, Miss Lutterthwaite, I recommend you keep your anchovies close, and your aunt closer. And with that he tipped his hat and stepped out into the chill spring morning, where a pale sun had begun to struggle through the fog. The grave at St. Ethelburga's remained open, but the question now loomed, had it been dug too soon, or not soon enough? Whimsy's thoughts were still entangled in the riddle of the missing body as he made his way back to the village, the morning fog lifting slowly to reveal a countryside neither as serene nor as simple as it appeared. He was drawn to the notion that someone had engineered this spectacle, this funeral without a corpse, not merely out of caprice but with a purpose shrouded beneath layers of genteel obfuscation. The subtle art of deception was rarely loud, rather it thrived in the hush of polite conversation and the silences that punctuated them. His first call was to the local constable, a stout man named Sergeant Pym, whose official manner bore the subtle tremor of a man unused to anything beyond sheep theft or the occasional pilfered bicycle. Pym greeted Whimsy with a mixture of respect and evident relief that the mystery had attracted a professional. Nobody, you say? I dare say that complicates matters. Indeed, Whimsy replied. And yet, Sergeant, the absence of evidence often speaks louder than its presence. Tell me, have you taken statements from those who might have seen Mr. Lutterthwaite on the day of his alleged demise? Pym nodded briskly. Several. The fishermen at Crowthorpe and some folk near the cliffs. All say the boat was found capsized at dawn, no sign of him. No witnesses saw him board or return. A tragic accident, if you ask me. Tragic, certainly, but I wonder if that is the whole story. What of the tides, the prevailing winds? Any unusual weather? Stormy night, a strong gale from the southwest. Not the kind to welcome a small craft out for a quiet row. Ah, that is significant. And the boat, was it seaworthy? Any signs of damage or tampering? The boat was sound, found lodged, on the rocks below the eastern promontory. No holes or signs of sabotage. Whimsy nodded thoughtfully. I shall see the scene for myself. The afternoon was spent with Whimsy pacing the jagged coastline, the sea a restless grey-green beneath a lowering sky. The cliffs at the promontory were sharp and treacherous, a fact all too familiar to the villagers who spoke of the Devil's Leap with hushed reverence. Whimsy inspected the boat, still tethered awkwardly to a weathered post near the small boathouse, its hull battered by the elements but not by any deliberate violence. He noted the absence of footprints in the soft earth leading away from the moorland path above, save for one set leading to the boat and none returning. No signs of struggle, no discarded garments or personal effects. The conclusion, for the moment, was unsettling in its simplicity. The man had embarked willingly, or no, and vanished into the tumultuous sea. Yet the missing body posed a persistent contradiction. If he drowned, Whimsy mused aloud to no one in particular, the currents here would have cast up some remnant, clothes, bones, or the slightest trace. Bodies do not disappear without a trace. He was startled by a sudden voice behind him. "You might find that the sea has a sense of humour, Mr. Wimsey." He turned to find Miss Cordelia, eyes bright despite the chill. "I came to see for myself, to believe." "Belief is a luxury in this business. Facts are the true companions." She nodded, shivering slightly. "There's talk in the village, of course, strange sightings, lights on the cliffs at night, voices carried by the wind. Some say George had enemies. Enemies tend to be exaggerated, in the absence of hard proof, but they are worth investigating." Together they walked back toward the village, their footsteps muffled by the growing dampness in the air. At the crossroads, Wimsey paused, eyes catching a glint of metal half buried in the grass. He stooped and retrieved a small, ornate pocket. "Watch!" Its face cracked, but the hands frozen precisely at 7:15. "A curious find," he remarked, examining the piece. "It appears to have stopped at a particular moment. Perhaps the moment of accident or something else entirely." Cordelia peered over his shoulder. "George always wore a pocket watch. This looks like his. Then we have at least one tangible clue. Have you noticed whether this watch was reported missing?" "No. Aunt Ottoline said all his belongings were accounted for." "Curious," Wimsey muttered. That evening, back at the rectory, Wimsey convened with Lady Ottoline and Mr. Thrubb. The atmosphere was taut, as if the events of the past days had woven an invisible web tightening around each participant. Lady Ottoline poured coffee, her hand steady, but her gaze sharp. "I confess, Lord Peter," she said, "this watch worries me. George was meticulous about his possessions. For it to be lost here means he, or someone, was distracted or forced to part with it," Thrubb added. "It could have been dropped by accident, panic perhaps, or placed deliberately," Wimsey suggested, "to mislead. One cannot rule out duplicity." Lady Ottoline's lip twitched, but she remained silent. Cordelia, who had joined them unannounced, was visibly pale. "I heard voices tonight," she whispered. "By the old mill. Someone calling George's name." "Your imagination," said Thrubb brusquely. "Or something more," Wimsey said, quietly. "This village holds its secrets closely, but they leak in small, telling ways." The next morning brought a letter, delivered by a breathless messenger boy. Wimsey broke the seal to find a note from Canon Melbury, the rector, who had been avoiding him since the funeral debacle. The letter was brief, but urgent. A request to meet at the rectory's study with a promise of revealing information too delicate for general ears. Wimsey arrived to find the canon pacing, his clerical collar askew, his face pale beneath its usual ruddy hue. "Lord Peter," Melbury began, "there are things you do not know about George Lutterthwaite, things I swore never to reveal." Wimsey smiled faintly. "You have my undivided attention." The canon took a breath. "George was a man haunted, not by debts or estates, but by a secret past. Years ago, before he inherited the property, he was involved in, let us say, unsavoury dealings in London. A friendship with a certain Mr. Pembroke ended badly. George feared exposure." "Pembroke," Wimsey repeated. "I am familiar. A man with a reputation for disappearing when trouble loomed." Melbury nodded. "George's letter, the one we all saw, was drafted in haste. He spoke of setting matters right, but he was terrified. I believe he fled, intending to vanish utterly. So the death was staged? Possibly. But the missing body puzzles me still. If George truly escaped, why the coffin? Why the Guy? Funeral charade? An insurance of disappearance, perhaps, a final severance from the past, or a warning. Wimsey's mind raced. I must revisit the villagers. This new knowledge cast shadows on many faces. The canon looked at him with weary eyes. Be cautious, Lord Peter. Not all ghosts are dead. As Whimsy left the rectory, the afternoon sun broke through the clouds, casting long, jagged shadows over St. Ethelburga's churchyard. The stage was set for secrets long buried to claw their way back to daylight, and for the dead, or those presumed so, to speak in whispers and riddles. Whimsy's feet crunched softly along the gravel path leading to the village inn, the place where the undercurrents of gossip and half-truths found their natural refuge. It was here, amid the lingering scent of stale ale and wood smoke, that the tapestry of local lives might begin to unravel, or at least show the faintest threads of the concealed. The landlord, Mr. Farrington, a man with a face as weathered as the oak beams above his head, greeted Whimsy with a nod that betrayed no surprise. "Lord Peter, we've been expecting you, or at least hearing you were about. News travels fast in these parts." "Indeed, Mr. Farrington, though often it does so with the subtlety of a bull in a china shop." "Truth, that. But you're here for George, I take it?" Whimsy smiled thinly. "Among other things. I wonder if you might recall any unusual visitors or conversations in the days leading to Mr. Lutterthwaite's disappearance." Farrington scratched at his chin, his gaze drifting toward a cluster of locals nursing pints in the corner. "There was a fellow, rather out of place, if you ask me, came around a week before the funeral, dressed smart, city sort, kept to himself, mostly, but he asked about George's habits, his whereabouts. Didn't say much more. Did he give a name? No. Just that he was concerned about some old business." Whimsy made a mental note. The figure could well be Pembroke's shadow, or someone linked to the hinted-at past. "And the villagers? Any signs of resentment, grudges, or old feuds?" Farrington shrugged. "Well, you get your share of jealous siblings and sulky nephews around here. Old Mrs. Hayworth, George's cousin, isn't fond of him. She was quite vocal about the way he handled the estate. Said he was too soft on the tenants, and that he didn't know the first thing about running a farm." "Softness, you say? An interesting accusation in a world that rewards hardness." "Indeed. And then there's young William, George's nephew. A bit wild, some say, always running off with the wrong crowd. He was seen arguing with George a few days before the disappearance. Arguments often serve as fruitful distractions, or sometimes as clues." Whimsy's eyes twinkled. From the corner, a sharp voice interrupted. "You'll find no shortage of arguments in this village. But no one wants George dead. Well, not openly." Whimsy turned to find a woman standing, a striking figure in a modest dark dress that suited her sharp features and controlled demeanor. "Miss Langley, the schoolteacher," Farrington supplied. Whimsy inclined his head. "Miss Langley, your observations are valued. Would you care to share your thoughts on the matter?" She regarded him coolly. "I do not pretend to understand the complexities of your city ways, Lord Peter, but what I know is that George was troubled, not by money or family quarrels, but by something darker. He spoke once of shadows in his past, things he wished to forget. I believe the funeral was a desperate act to bury more than just a man. And you think the past is catching up?" "I do, and I think someone here fears the truth." Whimsy nodded. "Thank you, Miss Langley. Such fears often illuminate what the eyes refuse to see." Later that evening, Whimsy found himself in the small, dimly lit reading room of the village library. A collection of dusty tomes and local records offered a haven for quiet inquiry. With Cordelia's assistance, he delved into old newspapers and parish documents, seeking anything that might explain George's troubled conscience or hint at Pembroke's involvement. "Here," Cordelia said softly, pointing to a faded article dated some 15 years prior. "George Lutterthwaite was mentioned in connection with a scandal, embezzlement, if I'm not mistaken. The name Pembroke appears several times." Whimsy adjusted his pince-nez and read carefully. The article detailed a financial scandal involving a shipping company, the mysterious disappearance of funds, and an associate named Pembroke who vanished just before the investigation closed. George had been implicated but never charged. His cooperation and relocation to Crowthorpe apparently bought his silence. This certainly casts his disappearance in a new light, Wimsey mused. If Pembroke is still at large, George's fears were well-founded. But why stage the funeral? Why the charade? Because to disappear entirely is to abandon not only one's past, but one's obligations, debts, and, most importantly, one's reputation. George may have wanted to settle accounts before vanishing, or perhaps to mislead those watching. Cordelia shivered. Do you think Pembroke might be here, in Crowthorpe? It would explain the city gentlemen at the inn. Their conversation was interrupted by a sudden knock. The village constable, Sergeant Pym, entered, bearing news. Lord Peter, I've been checking on that gentleman at the inn. No papers, no references. He vanished overnight, leaving only a note requesting no interference. Curious, Wimsey remarked. A man who arrives to pry and leaves as swiftly as a shadow, someone seeking answers or trying to silence them. The constable sighed. If only we had more to go on. But we have more than we think. Wimsey's gaze lingered on a map spread across the table, dotted with the locations of suspicious activity and points of interest. There are still places to visit. The old mill, the cliffs, and the estate itself. The next day, Wimsey and Cordelia visited the mill, a derelict building on the outskirts of the village. The mill's wheel was long silent, and the interior smelled of dust and damp wood. Yet, it was said to be a meeting place for clandestine gatherings, an apt setting for secrets. As they explored, Wimsey's eye caught a scrap of paper pinned beneath a loose floorboard. The note was brief and cryptic. Midnight. Trust no one. Cordelia's breath hitched. Who would leave such a message here? Someone desperate or someone warning? It fits the atmosphere perfectly. Their return to the village was marked by an increasing sense of unease. The villagers, once polite but reserved, now eyed them with veiled suspicion. The shadows in their eyes were deeper than simple grief. At supper in the rectory, Lady Otterline remarked, "You have stirred the hornet's nest, Lord Peter. Some would prefer the dead remain so." Wimsey sipped his tea with a faint smile. But truth is a stubborn guest. It refuses to be ignored indefinitely. As night fell, the wind carried the faint echo of bells, an old church peal long silenced since the tragedy. Wimsey stood by the window, contemplating the threads he had gathered. Somewhere among them lay the key to the funeral without a body, a secret that would expose the fragile facades of Crowthorpe. In the quiet that followed, he resolved to follow the clues where they led, even if it meant confronting the darkness, lurking just beyond the village's polite veneer. The following morning dawned with a brittle clarity that seemed to underscore the unspoken tensions hanging over Crowthorpe like an autumn mist. Lord Peter Wimsey, always punctual, arrived at the estate well before the household had stirred, his figure cutting a solitary silhouette against the waking sky. The gravel crunched beneath his boots as he approached the main entrance, the wrought iron gate swinging slightly on its hinges, squeaking faintly, as though protesting the intrusion of daybreak. Inside, the house lay heavy with silence, as though waiting for the echoes of the previous day's revelations to settle. The butler, Mr. Crane, greeted him with a reserved nod, eyes shadowed but attentive. "Lord Peter, Mrs. Lutterthwaite is expecting you in the drawing-room." "Thank you, Crane. Please inform Lady Otterline I shall join her shortly." Wimsey's footsteps carried him through the ornate corridors lined with ancestral portraits, faces frozen in austere contemplation. Each seemed to watch his progress with quiet judgment, a gallery of disapproval or sympathy. He could not say. Which in the drawing-room, Lady Otterline sat by the window, a teacup poised halfway to her lips, her pale eyes bright with anxious expectation. "Lord Peter," she began without preamble, "the villagers grow restless. Since your visit, whispers have turned to accusations, and the air is thick with suspicion. Curious how quickly silence can morph into clamour." Whimsy replied lightly, though the concern beneath his tone was unmistakable. Lady Otterline sighed, placing the teacup down with deliberate care. I fear this investigation may unearth more than just the truth about George. There are shadows on this estate I had hoped would remain buried. And shadows, madam, often cast by ourselves as much as by others. Whimsy paused, considering the weight of her words. I have been reviewing the timeline of Mr. Lutterthwaite's last known movements, and I must say it does not entirely hold. The servants' testimonies, while carefully constructed, bear inconsistencies that suggest a degree of orchestration. Lady Otterline arched an elegant eyebrow. You do not believe in the straightforward narrative, then? Hardly ever, my lady. Reality tends to be far more entertaining and complex than a neat little story. With her permission, Whimsy was led to the servants' quarters, where he intended to question those whose lives were often overlooked, but whose observations could prove invaluable. There was Mrs. Trevelyan, the housekeeper, a woman with sharp eyes and an even sharper tongue, and Thomas, the young footman whose nervous energy betrayed more than his cautious answers. Mrs. Trevelyan, when asked about the night George disappeared, frowned thoughtfully. He was restless, Lord Peter, pacing the study late into the evening, glancing often at the grandfather clock, as if waiting for something, or someone. And did he receive any visitors at this unusual hour? No one I saw, but the house is large, and the servants' movements are often unnoticed. The kitchen staff claimed to hear raised voices at some point, but couldn't say who was speaking. Thomas chimed in hesitantly. There was the sound of footsteps, my lord, rapid, almost frantic, coming down the east corridor around 10 o'clock. I remember because I was passing by and paused, thinking someone was ill. A useful detail, Whimsy noted, filing it away carefully. And the clocks. Were they all functioning properly that evening? Mrs. Trevelyan smiled wryly. One might say the clocks here have a will of their own. The study clock stopped at 10:15, but the one in the hall chimed past 11 without pause. Odd, isn't it? Very. Timepieces often keep secrets. They are not meant to. As Whimsy pressed further, a subtle pattern emerged. Minor discrepancies in the servants' accounts, small omissions and contradictions that no one seemed quite willing to reconcile. The house itself seemed complicit in this web of half-truths, the shifting shadows of dusk casting unfamiliar shapes upon familiar walls. Later that afternoon, Whimsy and Cordelia returned to the village to visit the local vicar, Reverend Smythe, whose knowledge of parish records and community affairs often proved a useful supplement to official investigations. The Reverend, a thin, solemn man with an ascetic manner, welcomed them into his modest study lined with leather-bound volumes and worn hymnals. Lord Peter, Reverend Smythe greeted, I understand your presence has stirred quite the excitement in Crowthorpe. Truth has a way of doing so, Reverend. I seek your insight on a matter that might lie beyond mere earthly concerns, at least in its surface appearance. The vicar nodded knowingly. The village has long been touched by the past in ways that are not always readily explained. George Lutterthwaite's family has history, some of it rather complicated. Complicated indeed, Whimsy agreed. Might you elaborate? Reverend Smythe cleared his throat. Years ago, before the Lutterthwaite estate was what it is today, there were rumours of a scandal involving a distant relative, an accusation of impropriety that left the family fractured. George's father was said to have been involved in a clandestine affair, resulting in a child kept secret from the family. An illegitimate heir? Whimsy mused, the pieces falling into a new configuration. Precisely. The matter was hushed up, but such secrets tend to fester. Some villagers believe the ghost of that betrayal still haunts the estate. Whimsy smiled thinly. Ghosts seldom solve mysteries, Reverend, but their presence can inspire mortal actions that do. He then inquired about church records for the past 2 decades, seeking any mention of deaths, births, or marriages that could confirm or deny the whispered rumours. Reverend Smythe provided meticulous copies of the relevant entries, though no direct evidence of the alleged heir was found. As they departed, Wimsey glanced thoughtfully at the village green bathed in the soft glow of late afternoon. The past is never truly dead, Cordelia. It merely waits, patient as the grave, for the right moment to emerge. Their next stop was the village post office, where an elderly woman named Mrs. Cartwright held court behind the counter. She was known for her sharp memory and a tendency to notice what others overlooked. "Mrs. Cartwright," Wimsey began, "have you observed anything unusual about Mr. Lutterthwaite's correspondence in recent months? Letters arriving or departing that seemed out of the ordinary?" She tapped her spectacles against her chin. "There was one letter, quite urgent, that came from London. George seemed anxious when he received it. I noticed because he asked me to keep it safe until he could collect it personally. Do you still have it?" "No, I'm afraid not. He took it away within the hour." Wimsey nodded. "Did he mention the sender?" "Only that it was from someone named Pembroke. That name stirred quite a reaction in the village, as you might know." "Indeed, I do. The connection grows clearer." Returning to the estate, Wimsey found Lady Otterline in the library, poring over old family albums. She looked up sharply. "Have you learned anything that might bring us closer to George?" "More questions than answers, Lady Otterline, but those questions narrow the field. It seems Mr. Pembroke's shadow still lingers, and the discrepancies in the household point to something more elaborate than a simple disappearance." Lady Otterline's eyes glistened with unshed tears. "If only George could tell us himself." Wimsey offered a reassuring smile, though his mind was already at work. The timeline, the conflicting testimonies, the secret correspondence, all threads leading toward an intricate tapestry. And somewhere within, a truth waiting to be unearthed. That night, as the village slipped into uneasy slumber, Wimsey sat by the study window, cigarette smoke curling upward in delicate spirals. His thoughts returned to the cryptic note found beneath the mill's floorboard. "Midnight. Trust no one." A clock chimed softly in the distance, its echo seeming to reverberate from every corner of the estate. Time, Wimsey reflected, was the ultimate witness, and the most treacherous accomplice. Tomorrow promised revelations, or perhaps deeper mysteries. But for now, he allowed himself a brief moment of quiet satisfaction. The game was afoot, as the old saying went, and Lord Peter Wimsey was ready to play. The morning's chill had not yet been dispelled when Wimsey resumed his methodical exploration of the Lutterthwaite estate. The weight of unsaid things pressed upon the house with a palpable gravity, as if the very walls conspired to conceal secrets too sordid for daylight. The previous day's discoveries, the whispered rumours of a concealed heir, the strange letter from Pembroke, and the servants' fractured accounts, hung in his mind like uncollected clues, waiting for their proper place in the unfolding puzzle. He began with a renewed examination of the study, the scene of George Lutterthwaite's last confirmed presence. The heavy velvet curtains were drawn back now, allowing the full light of a grey dawn to spill over the room's cluttered order. Books lay open, papers scattered as though disturbed in haste, yet no immediate sign of violence marred the polished surfaces. Wimsey's eye, however, was drawn to the grandfather clock standing sentinel by the hearth, its hands frozen at precisely 10:15, the curious anomaly Mrs. Trevelyan had remarked upon. Odd that a clock should stop at the very time the house supposedly witnessed a disturbance, he murmured. A mechanical failure, or a carefully planted deception? He knelt, inspecting the clock's face and the finely wrought hands. No visible damage, but the pendulum had ceased to swing. With gentle hands he lifted the casing, revealing a subtle obstruction lodged within the mechanism. A tiny scrap of paper, folded and yellowed with age. Extracting it, he unfolded the note, revealing an elegantly penned message. Beware the silent witness, the one who hears but does not speak. Wimsey's lips twitched in ironic amusement. A poetic warning, if nothing else. But to what end? His investigation was interrupted by the arrival of Mr. Crane, who bore a letter with the distinct stamp of London. A messenger delivered this early, my lord. It bears no address, only the initials R.P. Wimsey took the envelope, feeling the weight of its contents. Breaking the seal, he drew forth a single sheet of creamy paper, its neat script unmistakably feminine. Dear Lord Peter, if you seek the truth behind the disappearance of George Lutterthwaite, you must look beyond the obvious. There are those within the household who wear masks more convincing than any actors. Trust not the eyes, but the ears, and consider that the walls themselves may have tongues. Yours, Rosamond Pembroke. Wimsey's eyes gleamed with renewed interest. Rosamond Pembroke. The name fits neatly with the mysterious correspondent, does it not? And one to watch closely, I imagine. With that thought, he set out to locate this elusive Mrs. Pembroke. The estate's archives revealed her as a distant cousin, long estranged, who had recently arrived at Crowthorpe, taking residence in a nearby cottage. Aware of her reputation for a sharp mind and a penchant for discretion, Wimsey approached the cottage with a mixture of curiosity and caution. The door opened before he could ring, and there stood Rosamond Pembroke herself, a tall woman with sharp features and eyes that seemed to miss nothing. Her greeting was cordial but measured. Lord Peter Wimsey, I anticipated your visit. Please come in. Inside, the cottage was neat and unassuming, yet every detail bespoke a mind attuned to order and observation. Bookshelves lined one wall, and a small desk bore scattered notes and photographs. Mrs. Pembroke, Wimsey began, your letter was most timely. I find myself intrigued by your assertion that some within the Lutterthwaite household wear masks. Might you care to elaborate? Rosamond's gaze sharpened. The household is a theatre, Lord Peter. Each player conceals something vital, and the script they follow is far from the one they recite aloud. I have my suspicions, but proof is elusive. Have you witnessed anything unusual since your arrival? She nodded slowly. Several things. The behaviour of the butler, for one. Mr. Crane is more than a mere servant. His presence at odd hours, his subtle influence over the staff. It is as if he guards more than just the household keys. Indeed, the role of the butler often extends beyond the obvious, Wimsey agreed. And what of Lady Otterline? She carries herself with a fragile dignity, but one suspects a steely core. Her grief is genuine, but it also blinds her to realities others perceive, Rosamond replied. There is fear too, fear of scandal, of loss. That fear can drive people to desperate measures. As they spoke, Wimsey's mind churned through the tangled web of motives and opportunities. He asked Rosamond if she had encountered any discrepancies among the servants' accounts, or if any of them seemed particularly cagey. The housekeeper, Mrs. Trevelyan, is both vigilant and calculating. She manages the household with an iron will cloaked in genteel softness. Yet I caught her once speaking quietly with the gardener, who himself seems burdened by secrets. There is an undercurrent of tension among them, a silent conspiracy. Wimsey mused aloud. A conspiracy of silence is often more telling than any confession. Before departing, he requested to see any correspondence or documents Rosamond had gathered. Among them was a letter from George to a lawyer, hinting at a contested will and a stipulation that the inheritance would pass to a secret beneficiary should anything befall him prematurely. Aha, Wimsey said, the plot thickens. If there is an unknown heir or a disputed legacy, it provides a motive for foul play indeed. Back at the estate, Whimsy convened with Lady Otterline, sharing these developments. Her composure faltered momentarily at the mention of the will, a flicker of something between dread and relief crossing her face. George was troubled by this for months, she admitted. He feared his past might destroy what he and his family had built. Whimsy pressed her for any knowledge of the secret beneficiary. She hesitated, then disclosed a name whispered in confidence, one that did not appear in the family records or public documents. That evening, Whimsy returned to the study where he had first found the note hidden in the clock. As he pondered the silent witness's warning, a fresh observation struck him. The study was equipped with a telephone, a recent addition to the house, yet the line showed signs of tampering. Inspecting the device closely, he discovered faint scuff marks near the receiver and a loosened wire that might have caused interruptions in communication. Sabotage, he concluded, or a deliberate attempt to cloak a conversation in silence. His thoughts circled back to the note beneath the floorboards at the mill, the cryptic "Midnight, trust no one." Could it be connected to this act of deliberate isolation? Perhaps the killer sought to ensure no calls for help could be made. Shaki. Pieces were slowly converging, secret correspondences, interrupted communication, a contested will, and a household rife with duplicity. The quiet, dutiful servants were not as blind as they appeared, and the masks worn by the family and retainers alike concealed motives sharpened by fear and desire. Whimsy's mind was restless, turning over the implications, when a sudden knock at the study door interrupted his reverie. It was Thomas, the young footman, looking pale and unsettled. "My lord," he whispered, "there is something you must see in the east corridor." I heard voices again, voices raised in anger. I thought it might be important." Whimsy rose, a faint smile playing on his lips. The night might hold answers yet, and the house was still willing to speak to those who would listen. With Thomas leading the way, Lord Peter Whimsy stepped into the shadowed passage, prepared to confront the murmurs of secrets that clung to the walls like cobwebs. The east corridor was a narrow, dimly lit artery running the length of the house's oldest wing, its low ceiling and heavy oak panels creating an atmosphere reminiscent of a crypt. The flicker of a single oil lamp cast wavering shadows along the worn carpet, distorting the stillness into restless shapes. Whimsy followed young Thomas quietly, each step muffled but careful, attuned to the possibility that voices might yet speak truths too dangerous to utter in daylight. The voices came again, low, urgent, not quite audible but charged with a tension that sharpened the senses. They seemed to emanate from a side door, once the servants' pantry, but lately repurposed for unknown reasons. Whimsy paused, his hand resting lightly on the cold brass knob, and listened. "It's not safe," a woman's voice whispered, tinged with fear. "If anyone overhears, then we must be certain," a deeper male voice replied. "The time is near, and hesitation will cost us everything." Whimsy's mind raced. These were not idle servants' quarrels. The stakes were higher, and the players more deeply embroiled than he had imagined. Slowly, he eased the door open and slipped inside. The room was small and cluttered with shelving laden with dusty jars and tins, a faint scent of herbs mingling with the dampness. Two figures stood in the shadows. Mrs. Trevelyan, the housekeeper, her usual composure fractured by anxiety, and the gardener, a stout man with nervous hands and a glance that flickered like a candle flame. Whimsy cleared his throat softly. "I trust I am not intruding upon matters best left to whispers." Mrs. Trevelyan started visibly, but recovered with practiced poise. "Lord Peter, it is not often we have the pleasure of your company in this less ceremonious part of the house." Whimsy's gaze settled on the gardener. "And you are?" "Samuel Hargreaves, my lord," the man replied, his voice steady despite his evident unease. "I tend the grounds, but I find myself embroiled in matters that concern more than mere horticulture." "Indeed," Wimsey said dryly. "It seems the Lutterthwaite estate harbours mysteries beyond the usual botanical variety." Mrs. Trevelyan exchanged a glance with Hargreaves before speaking. "We feared for the safety of the household, my lord. The disappearance of Mr. George has unsettled more than just the family." Wimsey inclined his head. "I share your concern, Mrs. Trevelyan. Might I ask what brings you to converse in such secrecy?" "There are threats," Hargreaves confessed, lowering his voice. "Whispers of those who would seize the estate by force or worse through means less visible." "And these threats, do they originate from within or without?" Wimsey queried. Mrs. Trevelyan hesitated. "Within, I fear. Old grudges, debts unpaid, and a growing restlessness among those who serve. Loyalty is fragile, my lord." Wimsey's thoughts returned to the enigmatic note found in the clock, the tampered telephone, and the contested will. The household was, indeed, a stage where many actors played double parts. "Have you noticed anything unusual in recent days? Strange visitors, unfamiliar voices, or perhaps unexpected departures?" He pressed gently. Hargreaves nodded. "A man calling himself Pembroke has been seen lurking near the grounds. His visits are infrequent but purposeful." "Rosamond Pembroke," Wimsey mused aloud. "A curious name, especially since she claims kinship with the family." Mrs. Trevelyan's eyes narrowed. "She is no stranger, but her intentions are unclear. Some say she returns to claim what she believes is rightfully hers." The pieces formed a pattern. A secret beneficiary, Rosamond's mysterious presence, the gardener's whispered warnings, and the housekeeper's guarded allegiance. Wimsey resolved to confront Rosamond directly once more. Before leaving, he asked if he might examine the pantry more closely. Among the jars, he found a small, crumpled envelope taped beneath a shelf. Inside was a hastily scrawled note: "The clocks deceive. Trust the unchanging bell." Wimsey's brow furrowed. The grandfather clock, the tampered telephone, and now a reference to the bell tower. It was clear the timing of events held the key, and deception lay in the details of time itself. The afternoon brought a meeting with Inspector Parker, who had been quietly managing the police inquiry. Parker's eagerness to close the case on a convenient suspect contrasted sharply with Wimsey's patient unravelling of complexity. "Your theories are fascinating, Lord Peter," Parker admitted, "but without a body or concrete proof, this is little more than conjecture." Wimsey smiled thinly. "Ah, but Inspector, the absence of evidence is often the most telling evidence of all." He proposed a careful reconstruction of the day's timeline, insisting that every moment, every sound, and every movement be accounted for with precision. The following morning, Wimsey returned to the bell tower, a slender spire rising above the estate like a watchful sentinel. The keeper, an elderly man with rheumy eyes, greeted him with a mix of suspicion and curiosity. "Bell rings on the hour, sir, but lately there's been some oddness. Sometimes it tolls twice, sometimes late." Wimsey ascended the narrow staircase to the belfry, noting the mechanism's intricate gears and the clock face visible from within. He observed carefully the alignment of the hands and the bell's strike. "Could the bell be manipulated to sound at incorrect times?" he asked. "Possible," the keeper admitted, "though I haven't the skill to do it." Wimsey's fingers traced the bell's striking mechanism, discovering a subtle adjustment that could delay the toll by a few minutes. "Aha," he murmured. A delayed chime could serve as a signal, or a diversion. He descended and made his way to the servants' quarters, where he questioned the staff about unusual noises or activities coinciding with the bell's irregular tolling. Most claimed ignorance, but Thomas, the footman, recalled a shadowy figure moving near the tower on the night of George's disappearance, "Did you see who it was, Thomas?" Wimsey inquired. "No, my lord. Just a tall man wearing a hat, quick on his feet." Wimsey's mind circled back to the mysterious Pembroke and the gardener's warnings. Whoever the visitor was, he had used the bell's altered toll to mask his movements. Late that evening, Wimsey gathered the family and key staff in the drawing room. His demeanour was calm but authoritative, a conductor preparing his orchestra for the final movement. "I have pieced together a timeline of events surrounding Mr. George Lutterthwaite's disappearance," he began. "The tampering with clocks and the bell tower's mechanism were deliberate acts to confuse and mislead. The secret correspondence, the hidden beneficiary, and the tensions within this household all converge to a single truth. Someone here sought to control not just an inheritance, but the narrative itself." Eyes shifted uneasily around the room. Lady Otterline's hands trembled slightly. Mr. Crane's expression hardened. Mrs. Trevelyan's gaze was inscrutable. Wimsey continued, "But the question remains, who is the silent witness, and what truth does the house conceal beneath its polite facade?" A heavy silence fell, broken only by the distant echo of the bell's late toll, a reminder that time, though often malleable in human hands, eventually reveals all. Wimsey's investigations had uncovered layers of deception, but the final revelation, the unmasking of the culprit and the explanation of the missing body, still awaited, cloaked in the shadows of human frailty and cunning. For now, the house held its breath, and Lord Peter Wimsey watched, waiting for the next piece to fall into place. The stillness of the drawing-room lingered long after Wimsey's measured words had fallen like quiet stones into the gathered silence. The distant, errant tolling of the bell tower seemed to underscore the gravity of the moment, a metronome counting down to a revelation yet withheld. Lady Otterline's fingers absently traced the rim of her teacup, her gaze fixed somewhere beyond, the polished oak mantelpiece, as if seeking answers in the faded portraits of her ancestors. Mr. Crane, ever the stoic solicitor, sat rigid, his jaw taut. Mrs. Trevelyan maintained a studied calm, though the slightest twitch at the corner of her mouth betrayed nerves carefully concealed. Only the younger servants, seated awkwardly by the hearth, exchanged uneasy glances, the weight of unsaid truths hanging heavy in the air. Wimsey, whose presence seemed both commanding and detached, allowed the silence to stretch a moment longer, before breaking it with the precision of a surgeon's scalpel. "Let us consider, then, the significance of the altered timepieces and the bell's inconsistent tolling. These are not mere irritants, nor simple mischief. They are calculated measures designed to manipulate perception and obscure fact." He glanced meaningfully at the clock above the mantel, its hands frozen at 9:15. "Time is the great witness in this house, yet it has been coaxed into silence or deception." He rose and moved to the window, drawing aside a heavy curtain to reveal the grounds bathed in the pale light of a waning moon. The estate, which by day appeared the epitome of genteel order, now resembled a stage set for clandestine dealings. "Mr. Crane," Wimsey addressed the solicitor, "your efforts to settle the estate have been admirable, though the existence of the contested will suggest a history of strained loyalties and concealed ambitions." Crane cleared his throat. "Indeed, my lord. The late Mr. George Lutterthwaite was a man of complex relationships. His sudden disappearance, or presumed demise, has stirred emotions long dormant. Yet it is the nature of these complex relationships that demands our scrutiny," Wimsey said, returning to the hearth. "Not merely in their sentiment, but in their capacity for motive." Lady Otterline, her voice brittle yet composed, ventured, "You imply that someone within this household might bear responsibility for George's absence." "Implication is but the first step," Wimsey replied dryly. "Fact and deduction must follow." He turned to Mrs. Trevelyan. "You spoke earlier of internal threats. and of loyalty's fragility among the servants. Have you any knowledge of secret alliances, debts, or grievances that might have festered unseen?" She hesitated, then nodded slowly. "There have been murmurs, particularly regarding Mr. Hargreaves, the gardener. His conduct has been unusual, often absent without explanation, sometimes overheard in heated conversations with a stranger in the village." At that moment the door creaked open, and Samuel Hargreaves entered, his expression guarded but defiant. "I heard my name, my lord." Wimsey inclined his head politely but firmly. "Mr. Hargreaves, your recent absences and conversations have raised questions. Might you enlighten us on your actions and associations?" The gardener's hands clenched. "I admit to visiting the village more frequently than usual, but only to seek information about a man named Pembroke. I believed him to be involved in schemes that could imperil this estate." "And your relationship with Pembroke?" Wimsey prompted. "Adversarial, my lord. Pembroke seeks to claim what is not his, by force or fraud. I feared for the household's safety." Lady Otterline's eyes widened. Pembroke again. "What proof have we of this individual's existence beyond mere rumour?" Wimsey smiled thinly. "Proof, my lady, lies in observation and testimony. I have reason to believe Pembroke is no mere stranger, but a shadow cast by someone within these very walls." The assembled company exchanged uneasy glances. The suggestion that a threat was internal rather than external stoked old fears and resentments. Wimsey moved to the mantel and picked up a slender envelope, one he had found earlier among the clockwork's minor components. This note, found, taped beneath the pantry shelf, reads, "The clocks deceive. Trust the unchanging bell." It is a curious admonition, suggesting that time itself is a ruse, and the bell, our constant sentinel, the sole reliable marker. He turned to the elderly bellkeeper's testimony. "We have established that the bell's tolling was deliberately altered, delayed, or advanced to create false impressions of timing. This manipulation would allow an intruder to move unseen, to stage events with impunity." Wimsey paced thoughtfully before the fire. "Consider the timeline of the night in question. The delayed bell toll could mask the arrival or departure of an individual, or conceal sounds that might betray a struggle." Mrs. Trevelyan's face paled. "Then the absence of the body, could it be that Mr. George is not dead? That he may have fled, or been removed by those who wished it so?" Wimsey replied. "The latter possibility cannot be discounted, especially in light of conflicting testimonies." He addressed the servants. "Is there any who can account for every hour of the missing night?" A tense silence greeted the question, broken only by Thomas, the footman, who cleared his throat. "I saw a man, my lord, tall, with a hat, near the bell tower after the last toll." Wimsey's eyes narrowed. "And was this man accompanied?" "No, my lord, he was alone." "Then," Wimsey mused, "he may well be our elusive Pembroke, or another figure whose role is yet to be uncovered." Lady Otterline's voice trembled. "Could it have been George himself attempting to escape?" "It is conceivable," Wimsey admitted. "Yet one must ask why such elaborate deceptions were necessary if flight alone were the intent." He fixed the room with a steady gaze. "There is one detail that has yet to be addressed, the question of the missing salver." Mr. Crane frowned. "The silver salver from the dining room, my lord. It vanished shortly after the disappearance was discovered. A trivial item to most, but to a detective, a potential key." Wimsey unfolded his hands. "I propose a closer examination of the dining room, specifically the arrangement of the furniture and the trajectory of footsteps recorded by disturbed carpets." Later that evening, under the soft glow of gas lamps, Wimsey and Inspector Parker retraced the path from the dining room to the east corridor, noting faint impressions in the rug, a scuff mark near the window latch, and a misplaced chair. The salver was no doubt used to carry something, Or someone, Whimsy observed. The direction of the footprints suggests an exit through the window, perhaps to avoid detection. But the window overlooks the gardens, Parker remarked skeptically. And it's several feet from the ground. Indeed, Whimsy said, which brings us to the gardener once again. Could he have assisted in such an escape or removal? Parker nodded. A possibility worth pursuing. Returning to the servants' quarters, Whimsy questioned Hargreaves more closely about his nighttime activities. The gardener faltered under scrutiny, revealing contradictory accounts of his whereabouts. Whimsy's patience remained unruffled. Mr. Hargreaves, it is often said that a lie told once may be forgiven, but repeated falsehoods bind one in a noose of their own making. The gardener's defiance melted. Very well, my lord. I was at the bell tower that night, not as a conspirator, but to confront Pembroke. Which brings us to the crux, Whimsy concluded. Who then is Pembroke, and what is his stake? In this curious drama? Lady Otterline's voice was a whisper. Pembroke is Rosamond's assumed name, a guise to conceal a past that she hopes remains buried. Whimsy smiled faintly. Ah, the double life emerges, an identity crafted to cloak ambition, resentment, or guilt. He folded his arms, the flickering firelight casting shadows across his thoughtful face. We stand on the threshold of revelation, yet the final pieces remain elusive. The next steps must be taken with care, for the truth will, as always, be stranger than fiction and far more perilous. Outside, the bell tolled once more, steady, unchanging, a sombre drumbeat heralding the denouement that awaited in the shadows of Lutterthwaite Hall. Whimsy's thoughts lingered on Lady Otterline's revelation as the cold dawn began to seep through the heavy curtains of the drawing-room. The notion that Rosamond, the seemingly demure daughter of the late George Lutterthwaite, might harbour a secret identity under the name Pembroke sent ripples of reconsideration through the narrative. What had been a straightforward inquiry into a disappearance now threatened to unravel into a labyrinth of deception and hidden motives. He found himself pacing before the hearth, the flickering embers casting long shadows on the ornate wallpaper. The servants had retreated to their quarters, their hushed whispers barely audible beyond the heavy oak doors. Only the persistent ticking of the grandfather clock broke the stillness, a rhythmic reminder of the inescapable march of time. Inspector. Parker joined Whimsy, a quiet determination etched on his face. The evidence points to Rosamond in some capacity, but the details remain frustratingly vague. If Pembroke is indeed an alias she uses, the question becomes why and how it ties into her father's vanishing. Whimsy nodded, eyes narrowing, in thought. Precisely. We must delve into her past and the circumstances surrounding her dual identity. The simplest explanation often conceals the deepest truth. They agreed to begin with the family archives, stored in the vast library that dominated the east wing of Lutterthwaite Hall. It was a room thick with dust and the musty scent of aging parchment, its shelves heavy with leather-bound volumes and forgotten ledgers. Here, secrets were kept in ink and binding, waiting patiently to be uncovered. As they sifted through birth records, personal letters and estate documents, a clearer picture of Rosamond emerged. Born Rosamond Pembroke, she had been adopted by the Lutterthwaite family after a scandal involving her biological parents. The adoption was cloaked in discretion, intended to preserve the family's reputation. Yet the alias persisted in whispered circles and old correspondences. Her use of Pembroke is no mere affectation, Whimsy observed. It is a thread woven into her identity, a link to a past she has sought to obscure. Among the letters, one in particular caught Whimsy's eye. A terse note from a man named Pembroke, dated just weeks before George Lutterthwaite's disappearance. It contained veiled threats and an insistence on a clandestine meeting at the bell tower. The handwriting was elegant but hurried, the tone unmistakably urgent. This suggests a confrontation, Parker mused. But with whom? And over what matter? Before they could ponder further, the sharp sound of approaching wheels interrupted their search. A carriage rattled along the gravel drive, coming to a halt at the library's arched window. The door opened, and Lady Otterline entered, her face pale but resolute. "I have something you must see," she said breathlessly, producing a folded sheet from her reticule. It was hidden in my father's desk, a diary page torn but revealing. The page was stained and fragile, but the words were unmistakable. It chronicled a secret plan George had devised to expose a plot against the estate, implicating not only a stranger named Pembroke, but also hinting at a betrayal close to home. Whimsies. Fingers traced the faded script. The plot thickens. George's disappearance was no accident. It was a calculated act to shield the family from ruin. Parker's brow furrowed. If George intended to expose a betrayal, then the traitor remains within these walls. Whimsies' gaze swept the room, taking in the portraits that seemed to watch with silent accusation. Indeed, and we must now turn our attention to those who stood to gain from his silence. That evening the household gathered once more, summoned by Whimsy's insistence. The atmosphere was taut with anticipation, every glance weighed with suspicion. He began by recounting the discoveries from the archives and Lady Otterline's find, carefully constructing the timeline and motives. "Rosamond, you carry the legacy of Pembroke, a name linked to threats and secrets," Whimsy said gently. "Will you explain the nature of this alias and your involvement in recent events?" Rosamond's composure wavered, her hands clasping and unclasping nervously. "I assumed the name Pembroke to escape the shadow of my birth family's disgrace," she confessed. "But I swear I sought no harm to my father or this household. The threats you speak of were made against me, not by me." Her words planted new questions rather than answers, and Whimsy pressed on. "If you were the target of threats, then who benefits from your distress?" A silence settled until Lady Otterline broke it. Could it be that someone manipulated us all, using Rosamond's past as a smokescreen? The possibility struck a chord. Whimsy's mind raced through the tangled web of half-truths and concealed animosities. We must look deeper into the household's recent visitors and the accounts of the servants. A thorough review of the guest logs revealed an unrecorded arrival shortly before George's disappearance. A Mr. Elwyn, a solicitor from a distant town, whose name had gone unnoticed amid the household's many correspondences. Summoning the household steward, Whimsy learned that Mr. Elwyn had been invited for a confidential discussion regarding the estate's finances. Yet no formal records existed of his visit beyond whispered rumours. "Let us locate this Mr. Elwyn," Whimsy said decisively. "His involvement may be the missing link." Days passed as inquiries were made and networks tapped. Finally, a breakthrough. Mr. Elwyn was found residing in a modest inn on the outskirts of the village, reluctant but cooperative. In the dim light of the inn's parlour, Elwyn recounted his dealings. He had been hired by George Lutterthwaite to investigate irregularities in the estate's accounts, fraudulent transactions siphoning funds under the guise of legitimate expenses. "The trail led me to one name repeatedly," Elwyn said quietly. "Mr. Crane, the solicitor currently managing the estate." The revelation sent a chill through Whimsy and Parker. Crane's steadfast presence had masked a duplicity that now threatened to topple the entire house of cards. Returning to Lutterthwaite Hall, Whimsy confronted Crane with the allegations. The solicitor's facade cracked under scrutiny, and he confessed to embezzlement, orchestrated to fund secret ventures that would ultimately enrich him at the estate's expense. "But George discovered my scheme," Crane admitted bitterly. "He threatened exposure. And in the chaos that followed, I feared for my own safety. I did not harm him, but I ensured his disappearance would halt the investigation." Whimsy listened, the pieces aligning into a grim mosaic of betrayal and fear. As the truth settled over the household like a storm cloud, the mystery of George Lutterthwaite's disappearance moved closer to resolution. Yet Whimsy knew that every revelation invited new questions, and the night's shadows still held secrets waiting to be unearthed. The confession weighed heavily in the charged silence that followed. Crane's admission, delivered with a mixture of defiance and desperation, seemed to lift one veil, only to reveal a deeper, more tangled web beneath. George Lutterthwaite's disappearance was no longer simply a question of a vanished man or a missing will. It was a tableau of human frailty and calculated greed, woven tightly into the very fabric of Lutterthwaite Hall. Whimsy, his expression unreadable, allowed the moment to stretch before speaking. "Mr. Crane, your actions have set in motion a series of consequences that ripple far beyond your intentions. Yet I find myself compelled to ask, if you did not harm Mr. Lutterthwaite, then where is he? And why has no one laid eyes on him since that fateful night?" Crane's gaze faltered, and for a moment it seemed as if he might retreat into silence once more. But then he spoke, voice low and hurried. I do not know precisely. After George confronted me, he vanished. I sought him, but the estate is vast and the night was dark. I feared to implicate myself further by searching too. Openly, I confess, I concealed certain truths to protect myself. Lady Otterline, who had until now remained a poised observer, stepped forward. "Concealed truths, Mr. Crane. That is a phrase that begs clarity. We are all bound by loyalty to the memory of my father. If you possess knowledge that may bring him to light, now is the time to speak plainly." A bitter laugh escaped Crane. "The truth, Lady Otterline, is that your father was not the man you believed him to be. His debts, his secrets, they threatened to bring this family to ruin. I only sought to save the estate. If that required concealment, so be it." Whimsy's eyes gleamed with a renewed intensity. "Debt and ruin are powerful motives indeed. But motives must be married to actions if justice is to prevail. We must look beyond words to the evidence." He gestured toward the fireplace, where a recently extinguished fire had left a faint, acrid scent. "During my search of the grounds, I discovered traces of a substance, an unusual residue near the servants' entrance. I requested the expertise of chemists, who identified it as a compound used in the preservation of organic material. This suggests that if Mr. Lutterthwaite were harmed, his body might be hidden, preserved, or otherwise concealed within the estate." Murmur spread through the room, the servants shifting uneasily. Whimsy's gaze settled on Thomas, the footman who had earlier mentioned the tall man near the bell tower. "Thomas, you have been forthright. Might you recount again what you saw that night?" Thomas swallowed hard. "Yes, my lord. I saw a figure, tall, as I said. He lingered by the bell tower long after the last toll. Then he vanished toward the east wing. I thought no more of it until I saw the broken latch on the dining room window." "Did you notice any sounds?" Whimsy pressed. "No, my lord. It was eerily quiet, almost as if the house was holding its breath." The inspector nodded thoughtfully. "The broken latch suggests a hurried exit or entrance. Combined with the compound found near the servants' entrance, it points to a carefully orchestrated plan to conceal movements and evidence." Lady Otterline's voice trembled with suppressed emotion. "If my father was hidden somewhere on the estate, why has no one found him? Surely years have passed. There must be signs, some clue we have overlooked." Whimsy approached the window, peering into the shadowed garden. "That is what we must discover. The estate is old, with many hidden corners and forgotten spaces. It is quite possible that a secret chamber or forgotten cellar exists, unknown even to those who dwell here." The mention of a secret chamber struck a chord. It recalled faint references in the family diaries to the old vault beneath the east wing, a phrase that had previously been dismissed as legend or metaphor. Now it demanded a fresh investigation. Whimsy convened a search of the East Wing the next morning. With careful precision, he led a party through dusty corridors, peeling back layers of time. The walls seemed to hold their breath as they approached an inconspicuous panel, cleverly concealed behind a tapestry depicting the family crest. With a whispered countenance of patience and skill, Whimsy manipulated the hidden latch, and the panel swung open to reveal a narrow, spiraling staircase descending into darkness. The air that escaped was damp and cold, thick with the scent of earth and disuse. A flicker of torchlight revealed stone walls, their surfaces rough and slick, bearing the faint remnants of old soot marks from candles long extinguished. The group descended cautiously, the echo of their footsteps swallowed by the silence. At the base, they found a door, its wood swollen with moisture, but still intact. Whimsy pushed it open with care, revealing a small chamber lined with shelves and scattered with remnants of aged furniture, but most striking was a rusted iron cot on which lay a bundle of cloth, tightly wrapped. As they approached, Lady Otterline gasped, clutching her handkerchief. Whimsy carefully untied the bundle to reveal a leather-bound ledger, and beneath it, a worn leather satchel. The ledger's pages were brittle but legible, filled with painstaking notes, accounts, and correspondence dating back several years. Mr. Lutterthwaite's hand, Whimsy observed. This ledger could hold the key to understanding the pressures he faced and the true nature of the estate's troubles. The satchel contained more than papers. A small, ornate key and a folded map of the estate, with markings indicating hidden compartments and tunnels unknown to most. Inspector Parker's eyes gleamed with excitement. This is a revelation. We have tangible evidence of secret places and concealed plans. But it also raises the question, did George retreat here voluntarily? Was this a sanctuary or a prison? Lady Otterline stepped forward, her voice steady but charged. If my father was alive, hiding in the shadows of his own home, it is both a tragedy and a testament to the betrayals that plagued him. Whimsy's mind worked swiftly. We must cross-reference the ledger's entries with recent events and testimonies. This will allow us to map the estate's hidden features and determine if Mr. Lutterthwaite sought refuge or was confined against his will. The investigation gained new momentum as the household absorbed the import of the discovery. The spectre of George Lutterthwaite's fate shifted from absence to presence, tangible yet elusive. In the days that followed, Whimsy and Parker undertook meticulous examinations of the ledger, cross-checking financial irregularities, secret correspondences, and estate layouts. A pattern emerged, one of escalating threats, secret meetings, and a web of alliances both inside and outside the household. The ledger detailed covert transactions made in the name of Pembroke, revealing that Rosamond's alias was more than a mask. It was a conduit for dealings designed to protect the estate from ruin. The entries suggested she had acted in her father's interest, negotiating with allies and confronting enemies in shadowed negotiations. Yet the ledger also hinted at betrayal. A name repeatedly appeared alongside suspicious entries, that of a local landowner whose interests conflicted with the Lutterthwaite estate's future. This individual had motive, means, and opportunity. Whimsy's suspicions deepened. The truth was no longer a single thread, but a tapestry of ambition, loyalty, and treachery, each strand pulling taut against the others. One evening, as the household gathered for supper, Whimsy spoke with quiet authority. "We are nearing the heart of the matter. What remains is to confront those whose actions have shaped this tragedy, to unravel their secrets in the light of day." As the candles flickered and the shadows lengthened, the long-buried mysteries of Lutterthwaite Hall began to stir once more, ready at last to reveal the truths that time had so carefully concealed. The air in the drawing room was thick with anticipation as whimsy gathered the assembled household. Each face reflected a mixture of anxiety, curiosity, and resignation, emotions stirred by the long, twisting investigation that had pulled the threads of their lives into a tangled knot. Yet beneath the tension lay a shared hope that the mystery of George Lutterthwaite's disappearance and the fate of the estate would finally be unravelled. Whimsy began with measured calm. "We have uncovered much secrets hidden in ledger pages, concealed chambers beneath these very floors, and the tangled web of alliances and betrayals that shaped the last days of Mr. Lutterthwaite. But the truth, as ever, lies not only in what we find but in the faces before us." He turned to Lady Otterline. "Your father was a man burdened by his own demons and the pressures of preserving his legacy. The ledger showed us his dealings, often desperate, sometimes deceitful, yet never without the desire to protect his family." Crane shifted uneasily, but Whimsy's gaze was steady as he addressed him directly. "Mr. Crane, you confessed to certain actions in the heat of fear, yet you did not act alone. There was a hand, more subtle and colder, guiding events to this outcome." All eyes fell on Rosamond, whose composure faltered briefly before hardening into resolve. "I have done what was necessary to protect what remained," she said quietly. "Father's enemies were many. I played their game to shield the estate." Whimsy nodded slowly. "Indeed, your alias was more than a shield. It was a sword. But it was also a blindfold that led to greater peril. The local landowner, Mr. Hollingsworth, whose name appears alongside troubling transactions, was your adversary, yes?" Rosamond's jaw tightened. "He sought to acquire the estate, to strip it from us entirely. I confronted him, but I did not harm my father." Whimsy's eyes narrowed. "No, the harm came from elsewhere. The ledger's notes about the estate's secret vault suggest a final act, an attempt by Mr. Lutterthwaite to vanish from the threats closing in upon him." He led the group to the hidden chamber once more, pointing to a recess behind the shelves. With a practiced hand, Whimsy removed a loose stone, revealing a small hollow beneath. There lay a bundle of aged papers and, wrapped carefully, a faded coat, clothing too small for the robust man who once owned it. Inspector Parker stepped forward, his voice steady. "Mr. Lutterthwaite was not dead but concealed, imprisoned by circumstances and his own despair. He had taken refuge here, hidden from his enemies, hoping to secure his family's future from the shadows." A gasp rose from the room, and Lady Otterline's eyes filled with tears. "All these years, lost within his own home." Whimsy raised a hand, yet he was not forgotten, only misplaced by fear and silence. The search that followed uncovered George Lutterthwaite, frail but alive, hidden in a remote chamber deeper within the estate. His health was delicate, but his spirit endured, a living testament to resilience and the cost of secrets. As the household gathered around the recovered patriarch, the tensions dissolved into relief and a cautious hope for renewal. Whimsy's final words carried the weight of the journey. "Truth is a light that pierces the darkest corners, revealing not only the shadows but the strength to overcome them. Let this be a beginning for the Lutterthwaite family, a chance to rebuild, united and unburdened by the secrets that once divided them." The mystery resolved, the estate stirred anew with possibility. Beneath the ancient stones and whispered legends, the future awaited, clear, bright and forged by the truths finally brought to light.